Beyond your limits. Break old patterns and become your strongest self. A powerful journey from self-doubt to self-mastery. Published by Enlight Audiobook. Introduction: The Strength You Haven't Met Yet. There is a version of you that exists only as a possibility, a person who handles pressure with greater composure, walks through uncertainty with courage, and refuses to remain trapped by yesterday's limitations. That person is not waiting for a perfect moment. That person is being built by the choices you make now. Beyond your limits is not about becoming someone else. It is about breaking the patterns that have quietly shaped who you have become. The hesitation you keep defending, the fear you keep obeying, the excuses you keep carrying, and the old beliefs you have mistaken for facts. Your limits are not always visible. Some look like comfort, some sound like self-doubt, others disguise themselves as being realistic. Over time, these patterns can narrow your world until you stop asking what you could become and begin accepting what you have always been. But identity is not a prison sentence. It can evolve. Every time you challenge an old belief, keep a promise to yourself, step into discomfort, or choose progress over convenience, you move beyond another boundary. Strength is not something you suddenly discover. It is something you cultivate, decision by decision, setback by setback, day by day. The strongest version of you is not waiting somewhere in the distance. You are building that person right now. Chapter 1. The Invisible Walls You Built. The most difficult prison to escape is sometimes the one that has no walls. There is no locked door, no guard standing outside, and no chain around your feet. Yet a person can spend years living inside boundaries they cannot see. They avoid applying for the better job because they have already decided they are not qualified enough. They remain silent in important conversations because they fear being judged. They postpone learning something new because they have convinced themselves that they are too old, too busy, or simply not that kind of person. Eventually, the boundary becomes familiar. Familiarity can be deceptive. When we live inside a limitation long enough, we stop recognizing it as a limitation and begin calling it reality. Consider the story of Daniel. At 38, Daniel had spent more than a decade working in the same administrative position. He was dependable, experienced, and respected by his colleagues. Yet, whenever a higher position became available, he found a reason not to apply. He would tell himself, "They probably want someone more confident," or "I don't have the right qualifications." Sometimes he would say, "I'm comfortable where I am, maybe next time." There was always a next time. One afternoon, his manager unexpectedly asked him to lead a small presentation because another employee was unavailable. Daniel spent the evening preparing nervously. The next morning, his hands were unsteady and his voice sounded unfamiliar to him, but he finished the presentation. Afterward, his manager said something Daniel had not expected. "You should do this more often. You're better at it than you think." The comment stayed with him. Daniel realized something uncomfortable. For years, he had not been protecting himself from failure. He had been protecting himself from discovering that his old belief might be wrong. The following month, when a supervisory position opened, Daniel applied. He did not get the job. For a moment, the rejection seemed to confirm everything he had believed about himself. But instead of withdrawing, he asked the successful candidate what skills had made the difference. He discovered that he needed stronger presentation and management skills. So he enrolled in a short course, volunteered for more presentations, and gradually took on responsibilities he would previously have avoided. A year later, another position opened. This time, Daniel was ready. His story matters because the first application did not transform his life. The transformation began earlier when he stopped treating his fear as evidence. Psychological research on self-efficacy, the belief that we can carry out actions required for particular goals, has consistently connected stronger efficacy beliefs with greater persistence and more willingness to engage with challenges. But belief does not grow merely because we repeat encouraging words to ourselves. It grows when experience gives us evidence. That is why small acts of courage matter. Every time you speak when you normally remain silent, finish something you usually abandon, learn something you once considered beyond you, or step forward despite uncertainty, you collect evidence about yourself. You begin to realize, perhaps I can handle more than I thought. This is how invisible walls begin to weaken. Some limitations, of course, are real. Money can restrict opportunities. Responsibilities can restrict time. Health, geography, education, and circumstances can create genuine barriers. Pretending otherwise is not optimism, it is denial. But alongside real limitations, there are often assumptions that have never been tested. You may believe you are not creative because someone dismissed your ideas years ago. You may believe you cannot speak confidently because you once embarrassed yourself. You may believe you are incapable of discipline because you have failed at several attempts to change. But a failed attempt is not a permanent identity. It is evidence about what happened, not a final verdict about who you are. The question then is not simply, what is holding me back? A better question is, which limits have I accepted without ever challenging them? That question can open a door. Perhaps your next step is small. Perhaps it is uncomfortable. Perhaps you will not succeed immediately. None of that makes the step meaningless. The strongest version of you will not appear because you suddenly become fearless. It will emerge as you repeatedly refuse to let fear make every decision for you. Your invisible walls may have been built slowly. They can come down the same way, one choice at a time. Chapter 2. Rewrite the story. You tell yourself. A sentence repeated often enough can begin to sound like a fact. I'm not confident. I've never been good at this. I'm just not disciplined. I always mess things up. At first, these statements may describe a temporary struggle, but repeated over months or years, they can become something far more influential, an identity. Once a person starts seeing a weakness as part of who they are, changing the behavior becomes harder because every attempt to change feels like an argument against their own story. Consider the story of Maya. At 32, Maya was competent at her work, dependable with her responsibilities, and thoughtful in her relationships. Yet she carried one description of herself everywhere. I'm not a confident person. She had decided this years earlier. In university, she had once given a presentation and forgotten an important point. A few students laughed. The moment lasted less than a minute, but Maya remembered it for years. After that, she avoided speaking whenever she could. At work, she allowed colleagues to present ideas she had helped develop. When meetings became intense, she kept her thoughts to herself. Whenever someone complimented her ability, she quietly dismissed it. I'm good behind the scenes, she would say. It sounded humble. It was actually a boundary. One year, her manager asked her to lead a small project. Maya immediately wanted to decline. Her old story had already supplied the answer, people like me do not lead. But this time, she paused. She accepted. The first meeting was uncomfortable. Her voice shook slightly. She lost her train of thought once and had to look back at her notes. Nothing was perfect, but she finished. Then, something important happened. She realized that confidence had not been a prerequisite for action. It had been a consequence of action. The project went well. A few months later, Maya volunteered to lead another meeting. Then another. She began preparing more carefully, asking questions, accepting feedback, and gradually becoming more comfortable in situations she had previously avoided. Her personality had not suddenly changed. Her evidence had. She no longer had to convince herself that she was confident. She had begun collecting experiences that showed her she could function even when she felt nervous. This distinction matters. Your self-image is often built from accumulated evidence. When you repeatedly avoid something, your mind can interpret avoidance as proof that you cannot handle it. But when you approach challenges, survive mistakes, learn and try again, you create new evidence. Research on self-efficacy similarly emphasizes that experiences of successfully handling challenges can strengthen people's belief in their ability to deal with future demands. That does not mean repeating positive statements in front of a mirror will magically rewrite your life. Words matter, but behavior gives those words credibility. There is a profound difference between saying, "I am confident," and saying, "I am learning to handle situations that once intimidated me." The second statement leaves room for growth. That is where your new story begins. Perhaps you have spent years saying that you are terrible with money. Maybe you are not terrible with money. Perhaps you have never learned how to manage it consistently. Perhaps you tell yourself you are lazy. Maybe you are not lazy. Perhaps you have developed a pattern of postponing difficult tasks. Perhaps you believe you are bad at relationships. Maybe you have made mistakes, chosen poorly, communicated badly, or tolerated situations you should have left. Those are behaviors and decisions, not permanent definitions of your character. This does not mean ignoring your weaknesses. Quite the opposite. Real growth requires enough honesty to acknowledge where you fall short without turning that weakness into a permanent identity. "I failed" is different from "I am a failure." One describes an event. The other attempts to define an entire person through it. Your past deserves to be understood, but it does not deserve unlimited authority over your future. Changing your story also requires changing the questions you ask yourself. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" ask, "When did I start believing this about myself?" Instead of, "Why can't I change?" ask, "What is one behavior that would prove I am capable of changing?" Instead of, "What if I fail again?" ask, "What would I learn if I tried differently?" These questions do not erase difficulty. They redirect attention from judgment toward possibility. And possibility becomes meaningful when followed by action. Your identity is not carved into stone. It is shaped, reinforced, challenged, and revised through experience. Every small decision can become evidence for the person you are becoming. When you keep your word to yourself, you become a little more reliable. When you face a difficult conversation instead of escaping it, you become a little more courageous. When you return after failure instead of disappearing, you become more resilient. When you learn something you once believed was beyond you, you expand your definition of yourself. The goal is not to invent a fictional version of who you are. It is to stop confusing your old patterns with your permanent identity. You are allowed to outgrow the description you once needed to survive. You are allowed to revise the sentence, and perhaps the most powerful sentence you can begin with is not, "This is who I am." It is, "This is who I am becoming." Chapter 3. Stop waiting to feel ready. Readiness is a strange thing. We often treat it as a feeling that will eventually arrive at the right moment, calm, certain, confident, and perfectly prepared. Yet some of the most important decisions in life rarely come with that feeling attached. A new opportunity appears, and your mind immediately starts negotiating. What if I am not good enough? What if I make the wrong decision? What if someone notices that I do not know what I am doing? So you wait. You research a little more. You plan again. You tell yourself that next month will be better. You promise that once your confidence improves, you will finally begin. But sometimes preparation quietly turns into postponement. The problem is not that you are unwilling to move forward. The problem is that you have made feeling ready a condition for taking action, and that condition can keep you waiting for years. Think about a person who wants to change careers. They have considered the idea repeatedly, perhaps for 2 or 3 years. They watch courses online, read articles, compare opportunities, and talk about what they might do. They know their current work no longer fulfills them, yet they never take the first serious step, because they believe they need absolute certainty, but certainty rarely comes before movement. You learn what a road looks like by walking farther along it. This is one of the uncomfortable truths about personal growth. Confidence often follows action rather than preceding it. You do not always become confident and then act. Very often you act while uncertain, discover that you can handle the experience, and become more confident because of what you have survived and accomplished. Psychological research on self-efficacy has found that direct experiences of successfully handling challenges can strengthen people's beliefs in their ability to manage similar challenges in the future. In other words, experience can become evidence. This changes the way we should think about confidence. Confidence is not necessarily a personality trait reserved for naturally bold people. In many situations, it is partly built through repeated encounters with difficulty. The first difficult conversation may leave your heart pounding. The second may still make you uncomfortable. By the fifth, you may discover that you can remain composed even when the other person disagrees with you. You did not wait for courage. You worked your way into it. That distinction matters. There is a significant difference between reckless action and courageous action. Recklessness ignores consequences. Courage acknowledges the consequences and chooses to proceed when the potential value is worth the reasonable risk. You do not need to quit your job tomorrow because you are dissatisfied. You might begin by learning a relevant skill, speaking with someone in the field, updating your resume, or exploring realistic alternatives. You do not need to become an accomplished writer before writing your first page. You do not need to become physically fit before beginning to exercise. You do not need to become socially confident before introducing yourself to someone new. The first step does not need to prove that you are ready. It needs to prove that you are willing. There is another trap hiding beneath the desire to feel ready: perfectionism. Perfectionism can appear responsible. It tells you to prepare more, improve more, wait for better circumstances, and avoid mistakes. But underneath that respectable appearance can live a much simpler fear, the fear of being seen while still learning. A beginner has to look like a beginner. That is unavoidable. If you refuse to begin until you can perform like an expert, you have created an impossible entrance requirement. Consider learning a language. Your first conversations will probably be awkward. You will forget words, misuse expressions, and construct sentences that sound strange. If embarrassment becomes your reason to stop, you remain exactly where you started. But if you continue speaking, listening, correcting yourself, and trying again, your awkwardness becomes temporary rather than permanent. The same principle applies far beyond language. Every meaningful skill begins with imperfect performance. Every stronger identity begins with unfamiliar behavior. Every expanded life begins with something that initially feels slightly beyond the boundaries of the old one. This is why you should stop asking, "Do I feel ready?" Ask instead, "What is the next reasonable step I can take?" The question is smaller, but its consequences can be enormous. It moves your attention away from emotion and toward behavior. Maybe the next step is sending the email you have been postponing. Maybe it is registering for the course. Maybe it is making the appointment. Maybe it is having the conversation. Maybe it is simply sitting down for 20 minutes and beginning. Small action does not guarantee a particular outcome. That is important. You may still fail. The opportunity may disappear. Someone may reject you. Your first attempt may be disappointing, but action gives you something hesitation cannot: information. Once you move, you discover what works, what does not, what you need to learn, and what you are capable of handling. Even an unsuccessful attempt can provide information that endless speculation never could. Waiting feels safe because nothing has happened yet, but nothing happening is also a result. Years can pass while a person remains surrounded by plans for a life they never begin. Your strongest self will not always announce its arrival with confidence. Sometimes it will appear quietly in the decision to make the call, submit the application, speak honestly, start again, or take one uncertain step forward. You do not need permission from your emotions to begin. You need a direction, a reasonable plan, and the willingness to move. Readiness is not always something you feel before you begin. Sometimes it is something you build by beginning. Chapter 4. Discipline is your way forward. A promise made to yourself has a peculiar kind of weight. No one else may hear it. There may be no deadline, no supervisor, and no consequence when you break it. Yet every time you tell yourself, "I will do this," and repeatedly fail to follow through, something quietly changes. You begin to trust yourself a little less. The opposite is equally powerful. When you keep a small promise, especially when you do not feel like keeping it, you create evidence that your words can be trusted. That is where discipline begins. Discipline is often portrayed as a harsh quality. Waking before sunrise, following rigid routines, refusing every temptation, and pushing yourself relentlessly. But real discipline is much more practical. Discipline is the ability to act according to what matters, even when your feelings are asking for something easier. Motivation can help you begin. Discipline helps you continue. Motivation is emotional. It rises and falls with sleep, stress, circumstances, mood, and immediate rewards. On some mornings you may feel enthusiastic about exercising, studying, saving money, or finishing an important project. On other mornings, the same task can feel painfully inconvenient. If your progress depends entirely on enthusiasm, your results will fluctuate with your emotions. That is why strong people learn to follow through. Consider someone who decides to exercise regularly. During the first week, excitement carries them forward. They buy new clothes, create a schedule, and feel optimistic about the future. But by the third week, work becomes demanding, the weather is unpleasant, and the novelty disappears. Nothing is wrong. The excitement has simply expired. This is the moment when discipline becomes more valuable than motivation. The disciplined person does not necessarily feel inspired. They simply remember the decision they made when their mind was clearer. They do not ask, "Do I feel like doing this today?" They ask, "What did I decide matters?" That question changes everything. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to do everything. It is about choosing what deserves your energy and refusing to negotiate with yourself every time the task becomes inconvenient. There is freedom in that. When your important decisions are already made, you spend less mental energy debating them. You do not have to decide every morning whether you will exercise. You have already decided. You do not have to repeatedly negotiate whether you will study. You have already established the commitment. You do not have to wonder whether you will finish what you started simply because the work has become difficult. The decision was made earlier. This is why discipline can actually reduce mental clutter. But discipline does not mean perfection. One missed workout does not destroy your progress. One unproductive afternoon does not make you lazy. One poor financial decision does not mean you are incapable of managing money. The danger is not falling off your routine. The danger is turning one interruption into an identity. A disciplined person learns to return. That word matters. Return. You miss a day, then return. You lose focus, then return. You make a mistake, then return. You become discouraged, then return. Consistency is not the absence of disruption, it is the willingness to resume. Think of a person trying to save money. They create a reasonable plan, but an unexpected expense forces them to spend more than expected. They could conclude, "I always fail at managing money," and abandon the effort. Or they could adjust the plan, learn from the situation, and continue. The second response is discipline. It contains something deeper than self-control, self-respect. You are saying, "My temporary mistake does not have the authority to cancel my long-term intention." Discipline also requires reducing unnecessary friction. If you want to read more, keep the book where you can see it. If you want to exercise in the morning, prepare your clothes beforehand. If you want to spend less time on your phone, remove the most distracting applications from immediate reach. If you want to focus on important work, create periods when notifications are turned off. These actions may look insignificant, but they make the desired behavior easier to follow through on. You do not need heroic willpower every day. You need an environment that supports the person you are trying to become. There is another side of discipline that receives less attention: restraint. Sometimes discipline means doing something. Sometimes it means refusing to do something. It means not answering the angry message immediately, not buying something simply because you want it, not staying awake for another hour when your body needs rest, not saying yes because you are afraid someone will be disappointed, not abandoning a meaningful goal because something easier is available. Discipline is therefore not simply about productivity, it is about direction. Your strongest self is not created by filling every hour with activity. It is created by learning what deserves your time and protecting it. This requires resolve, but it also requires honesty. You cannot build discipline around priorities you do not genuinely value. If your goals belong to someone else, your family, your friends, society, or an image you are trying to maintain, you will eventually resist the effort. Choose commitments that connect with your values. Then follow through. Every time you do, you strengthen something more important than the habit itself. You strengthen your trust in yourself. That trust becomes a quiet form of confidence. You begin to know that when you say you will do something, you are more likely to do it. And when life becomes difficult, that self-trust becomes an internal anchor. Discipline is not a punishment for being imperfect. It is a structure for becoming dependable. It does not take away your freedom. It helps you become free from the constant control of impulse, distraction, and temporary emotion. You do not need to become extraordinarily disciplined overnight. Start smaller. Choose one promise. Keep it. Then keep it again tomorrow. Over time, those small acts of follow-through become something larger than a routine. They become evidence of character. And eventually, the person you once hoped you could become begins to look back at you through the choices you make every ordinary day. Chapter 5. Choose discomfort, build strength. A quiet life can become surprisingly small. Not because anything terrible has happened, but because every uncomfortable door has been left unopened. A difficult conversation is postponed, a new skill is avoided, a rejection is feared before it happens. A familiar routine becomes so comfortable that uncertainty begins to feel like danger. Little by little, the world becomes smaller, not because the world changed, but because the willingness to enter unfamiliar territory did. Discomfort is often treated as a warning sign. Sometimes it is, Pain can tell you to stop. Fear can alert you to genuine danger. Exhaustion can signal that you need recovery. No meaningful philosophy of growth should glorify suffering or encourage people to remain in situations that damage them. But not every uncomfortable feeling means something is wrong. Sometimes discomfort simply means you are doing something you have not learned to do yet. Think about the first time you speak in front of a room. Your heart accelerates. Your palms become warm. Your thoughts seem to disappear at exactly the moment you need them. It would be easy to interpret those sensations as proof that you are not capable of public speaking. But what if they mean something else? What if they simply mean you are inexperienced? That distinction can change the direction of a life. A person who avoids every uncomfortable experience gradually becomes dependent on familiarity. The familiar feels safe because it is predictable, but predictability is not the same as progress. Growth often begins where predictability ends. Learning a language is uncomfortable because you must tolerate making mistakes. Starting a new career is uncomfortable because you must become a beginner again. Setting boundaries is uncomfortable because some people may not like the new version of you. Exercising is uncomfortable because your body is adapting. Admitting that you were wrong is uncomfortable because pride wants protection. Trying again after failure is uncomfortable because memory reminds you how much the previous attempt hurt. Yet these experiences can strengthen you precisely because they require something from you. They require patience, they require humility, they require courage, and they require the willingness to remain present when your instinct says, "Get out." Consider someone who has spent years avoiding difficult conversations. Whenever conflict appears, they become agreeable. They say, "It's fine," when it is not. They suppress frustration until resentment quietly builds. They believe they are keeping the peace. Eventually, they realize something uncomfortable. Avoiding conflict has not created peace. It has created distance. So they begin practicing honest communication. The first conversation is awkward. The second is better. They learn to say, "I understand your point, but I see it differently." They learn to express disappointment without attacking. They learn to listen without immediately becoming defensive. The discomfort does not disappear because they became fearless. It becomes manageable because they became more capable. That is how strength develops. Not through one dramatic act of bravery, but through repeated exposure to situations that once controlled you. Psychological research on resilience and stress adaptation supports the broader idea that people can develop greater capacity to cope with challenges through experience, resources, and adaptive responses. The goal is not to seek unnecessary hardship, but to develop the ability to respond effectively when difficulty arrives. This is why you should sometimes choose constructive discomfort. Choose the workout when your body is capable of it. Choose the honest conversation when silence is creating resentment. Choose learning when ignorance is holding you back. Choose the difficult task before the easy distraction. Choose feedback when your ego wants praise. Choose responsibility when blaming someone else would be easier. These choices may not feel rewarding immediately, but immediate comfort and long-term well-being do not always point in the same direction. The easiest choice today can sometimes create a harder tomorrow. The harder choice today can sometimes create a freer tomorrow. There is a deeper reason discomfort matters. It expands your evidence about yourself. Before attempting something difficult, you may think, "I probably cannot handle this." After doing it, you have new information. Maybe you handled it badly, but survived. Maybe you performed better than expected. Maybe you discovered what you need to improve. Maybe you learned that the thing you feared was not as frightening as you imagined. Whatever the outcome, you know more than you knew before. This is how your internal boundaries move. You begin to say, I can handle difficult conversations. I can recover from rejection. I can learn unfamiliar things. I can remain steady when circumstances become uncomfortable. That is not blind positivity. That is earned confidence. But there is an important boundary here. You do not need to remain in a destructive relationship to prove you are resilient. You do not need to tolerate humiliation to become stronger. You do not need to destroy your health in pursuit of achievement. You do not need to suffer unnecessarily just to feel worthy. Strength is not measured by how much pain you can endure. Strength is measured by how wisely you respond to difficulty. Sometimes the strongest decision is to stay. Sometimes it is to leave. Sometimes courage means pushing forward. Sometimes courage means stepping back. The difference is discernment. Your goal is not to build a life without discomfort. Such a life does not exist. Your goal is to become someone who can distinguish between discomfort that should be faced and danger that should be escaped. That requires awareness. It also requires practice. Start small. Do the conversation you have been postponing. Try the skill you keep telling yourself you cannot learn. Ask for feedback. Take responsibility for one mistake instead of explaining it away. Spend a little less time choosing what feels easy and a little more time choosing what makes you stronger. You do not need to chase difficulty. Life will provide enough of it. But when constructive discomfort appears at the edge of your growth, do not automatically turn away. Pause, listen. Then ask yourself, is this hurting me or is this helping me grow? Sometimes the answer will be clear, and sometimes the uncomfortable path will be the one that leads you somewhere your comfortable life never could. Because strength is rarely built in the moments when everything feels easy. It is built when you discover that difficult does not always mean impossible. Chapter 6. Become the person your future needs. A future can look beautiful from a distance and still demand more from you than you expect. You may want financial freedom, meaningful work, stronger relationships, better health, greater confidence, or a quieter mind. But beneath every worthwhile goal is another question that deserves your attention. Who must I become to sustain the life I say I want? That question changes the entire conversation. Goals are usually described as destinations. We talk about earning a certain amount, getting a particular position, building a successful business, becoming fit, or creating a better life. But a destination does not tell you what kind of person can actually live there. A larger opportunity may require greater responsibility. A healthier body may require consistency. Financial stability may require restraint. A strong relationship may require emotional maturity. Leadership may require the ability to remain composed when everyone else is losing perspective. The future does not simply ask what you want, it asks what you are prepared to become. Consider someone who wants to become a successful entrepreneur. The dream may be attractive: independence, flexibility, recognition, and financial growth. But entrepreneurship also demands patience when results are slow, discipline when nobody is watching, humility when an idea fails, and resilience when uncertainty stretches longer than expected. If the person wants only the rewards but resists developing the qualities required to handle them, the goal remains an attractive picture rather than a sustainable reality. This principle applies everywhere. A person may want a peaceful relationship while refusing to communicate honestly. Someone may want financial freedom while continuing to spend impulsively. Someone may want professional growth while avoiding feedback. Someone may want confidence while constantly allowing fear to make their decisions. The contradiction is subtle. We often want the outcome without wanting the development that makes the outcome possible. That is why personal growth begins with identity. Instead of asking only, "What do I want?" ask, "What qualities would make that future natural for me?" If you want to become financially responsible, perhaps you need greater patience and restraint. If you want to become a respected leader, perhaps you need stronger listening skills and emotional control. If you want to become healthier, perhaps you need consistency rather than another temporary burst of enthusiasm. If you want to build meaningful work, perhaps you need the courage to tolerate periods when recognition is absent. This way of thinking moves you away from fantasy and toward preparation. It also changes how you make ordinary decisions. Suppose you want to become someone who is dependable, then every small promise becomes relevant. If you say you will call someone, call. If you commit to completing a task, follow through. If you make a mistake, acknowledge it instead of constructing an elaborate excuse. You are not merely completing tasks, you are rehearsing an identity. Each decision provides evidence about the person you are becoming. This does not mean you need to reinvent your personality. Becoming stronger is not the same as becoming someone completely different. If you are naturally quiet, you do not need to become loud. If you enjoy solitude, you do not need to become constantly social. If you are sensitive, you do not need to become emotionally detached. Growth is not about abandoning your authentic qualities. It is about developing the qualities you lack while preserving the qualities that matter. A calm person can become more assertive. A confident person can become more humble. A hard-working person can learn to rest. A generous person can learn boundaries. A cautious person can learn courage. A naturally ambitious person can learn patience. The strongest version of you is not an exaggerated version of your personality. It is a more developed version of your character. This is where standards become important. Your standards are the quiet rules that govern what you repeatedly accept, pursue, and tolerate. If you continually accept disrespect, your relationships will reflect that standard. If you tolerate your own excuses, your habits will reflect that standard. If you demand perfection before allowing yourself to begin, your progress will reflect that standard. Raising your standards does not mean becoming harsh with yourself or others. It means becoming more deliberate about what you are willing to normalize. Ask yourself what your future self would no longer negotiate with. Perhaps it would not negotiate with constant procrastination. Perhaps it would not sacrifice sleep for meaningless distractions every night. Perhaps it would not remain silent simply to avoid disappointing people. Perhaps it would not abandon a meaningful goal because progress became slow. These choices may appear small, but character is often formed in precisely these ordinary moments. A powerful life is rarely built through one extraordinary decision. It is built through hundreds of quiet decisions that eventually become a pattern. That is why you should stop waiting to feel like the person you want to become. Start behaving like that person in small, realistic ways. If you want to become disciplined, practice discipline today. If you want to become courageous, make one courageous decision today. If you want to become trustworthy, keep one promise today. If you want to become patient, practice patience in one frustrating situation today. You do not need to become the finished version immediately. You only need to cast another vote for the person you are building. There will be days when you fall short. That does not invalidate the identity you are developing. Growth is not linear. You will sometimes return to old habits, react emotionally, lose focus, or choose convenience over courage. The important question is not, did I fail to become my ideal self today? Ask, instead, what would the person I want to become do next? That question brings you back to the present. Your future is not built somewhere far ahead. It is quietly taking shape in the decisions you make while nobody is applauding. The life you want may require a stronger version of you. So do not merely chase the life. Build the person capable of carrying it. Chapter 7. Take back your time, energy, and attention. A day can disappear without making a sound. You wake up, answer a few messages, check your phone, move from one task to another, respond to other people's demands, scroll for a few minutes that become an hour, and finally reach the end of the day wondering where your energy went. Nothing dramatic happened, yet something important was spent: your attention. Time is often described as our most valuable resource, but attention may be even more revealing. Time passes whether you protect it or waste it. Attention determines what you actually experience, think about, work on, and eventually become. And in a world designed to interrupt you, protecting it has become a form of self-discipline. The modern problem is not always that people have too little time. Sometimes they have too many competing claims on it. A notification demands a response. A message creates another conversation. A social platform offers an endless stream of information. A colleague asks for a favor. A friend needs reassurance. A family member expects your availability. Meanwhile, the task that matters most remains untouched. You may spend 8 hours being busy without spending even 1 hour being deeply productive. This is the difference between activity and direction. Activity fills time. Direction gives time meaning. Consider someone who decides to write a book after work. Every evening, they tell themselves they will write for an hour. But before starting, they check messages. Then they watch a short video. Another appears. They respond to a notification. They read a few comments. Eventually, an hour has disappeared. The person may conclude, "I don't have enough time to write." But the deeper problem is not always time. It is attention that has been fragmented into pieces too small to create meaningful progress. This happens in many areas of life. A person wants to exercise but spends the evening exhausted from constant digital stimulation. Someone wants to study but keeps switching between textbooks, social media, and messages. A manager wants to focus on important work but spends the entire morning reacting to minor requests. A parent wants meaningful time with family but remains mentally attached to work even after leaving the office. The issue is not that these people do not care. They care deeply. They simply have not protected what they care about. That is why boundaries matter. A boundary is not a declaration that other people are unimportant. It is a decision about what you are responsible for and what you are not. You do not have to answer every message immediately. You do not have to accept every invitation. You do not have to explain every no. You do not have to remain constantly available to prove that you are helpful. There is a difference between being generous with your time and being careless with it. If you give every person immediate access to your attention, eventually there may be very little left for your own priorities. This is where discernment becomes essential. Not everything deserves the same level of attention. Some conversations matter deeply. Some tasks have genuine consequences. Some requests are urgent. Others simply feel urgent because they are loud. The ability to distinguish between them is a form of maturity. Your strongest self is not necessarily the person who does more. It may be the person who becomes better at deciding what deserves to be done at all. This requires removing things as well as adding them. Personal growth is often presented as accumulation. Read more, exercise more, learn more, work more, achieve more. But sometimes growth begins with subtraction. Remove one unnecessary commitment. Reduce one source of distraction. Spend less time around people who consistently drain your energy. Turn off notifications that do not serve you. Stop consuming information that leaves you anxious without making you wiser. Create space. Space is not emptiness. It is capacity. When your mind is constantly crowded, even important ideas struggle to breathe. This is why protecting attention can transform more than productivity. It can improve the quality of your thinking. You become more present in conversations. You notice your own emotions more clearly. You can work without constantly starting over. You can read without checking your phone every few minutes. You can rest without feeling compelled to consume something. You begin to experience your own life instead of continuously reacting to everyone else's. There is another form of energy that deserves protection: emotional energy. Some environments repeatedly leave you anxious, defensive, angry, or depleted. Not every difficult person can be removed from your life. Sometimes responsibilities require patience. Sometimes family, work, or circumstances limit your choices. But you can become more deliberate about how much emotional space you give to unnecessary conflict. You do not have to attend every argument you are invited to. You do not have to defend yourself against every opinion. You do not have to turn every disagreement into a battle. Sometimes peace begins with refusing to pick up what someone else throws at you. This is not indifference, it is emotional allocation. You are deciding where your limited energy can create the greatest value. Look at your ordinary day. Where does your attention disappear? Which activities leave you refreshed? Which leave you depleted? Which relationships strengthen you? Which repeatedly pull you into unnecessary chaos? Which commitments still matter? Which ones are simply habits you have never questioned? These questions can expose a surprising truth. Your life may not need more time. It may need better protection around the time you already have. You cannot control every demand that enters your day, but you can become more intentional about what you allow to stay. Protect your mornings, protect your focus, protect your rest, protect meaningful relationships, protect the goals that matter to you. Protect the quiet moments in which you can hear your own thoughts, because attention is not just something you spend, it is something you invest. And where you repeatedly invest it, your life gradually follows. Take back your attention, and you begin taking back your life. Chapter 8. When life pushes back, rise higher. Some lessons do not arrive gently. They arrive as rejection letters, unexpected bills, failed plans, broken promises, closed doors, and mornings when getting out of bed requires more courage than anyone around you realizes. You can prepare carefully and still lose. You can work honestly and still be overlooked. You can love someone deeply and still lose the relationship. You can make responsible decisions and still encounter circumstances you never anticipated. Life does not always reward effort immediately. That is one of its hardest truths. But difficulty has another side. It can reveal capacities that comfort never required you to develop. Consider Daniel. At 41, Daniel had spent years building a small printing business. It was not glamorous, but it supported his family and gave him a sense of independence. He had gradually expanded his customer base, hired 2 employees, and invested most of his savings back into the business. Then a major client left. Within a few months, revenue dropped sharply. Daniel tried to compensate by working longer hours. He reduced unnecessary expenses and contacted former customers. Nothing seemed to work quickly enough. Eventually, he had to close the business. For weeks, he felt humiliated. He avoided friends because he did not want to answer questions. He replayed his decisions repeatedly, wondering where he had gone wrong. One evening, his daughter asked him, "Are you going to try something else?" The question was simple, but it interrupted the story he had been telling himself. Daniel had been thinking, "I failed, so I am a failure." His daughter unknowingly offered another possibility. The business failed. What happens next is still undecided. That distinction became important. Daniel began examining what the experience had taught him. He had learned how to negotiate with suppliers, manage customers, train employees, control costs, and operate under pressure. He realized that although the business had disappeared, the skills had not. He started working with another company as an operations manager. It was not the future he had originally imagined, but it was not the end either. 2 years later, Daniel used what he had learned to start a smaller business with a more cautious financial structure. His first business had failed. His education had not. That is one of the most important ways to think about setbacks. Failure can take something from you without taking everything from you. When something goes wrong, the mind often rushes toward identity. "I lost the job" becomes "I am unsuccessful." The relationship ended becomes nobody will love me. The business failed becomes I cannot build anything. I made a terrible decision becomes I always ruin everything. But an event is not an identity. A mistake is information. A setback is an experience. A rejection is an outcome. None of them deserves unlimited authority over the rest of your life. Resilience begins when you create enough distance between what happened and who you believe you are. This does not mean pretending the setback did not hurt. Pain deserves acknowledgement. Disappointment deserves time. Grief cannot be solved with motivational slogans. There are moments when the healthiest response is to stop, recover, ask for help, and simply allow yourself to process what happened. Strength is not emotional numbness. It is the ability to feel something deeply without allowing that feeling to permanently dictate your direction. Eventually, however, another question becomes necessary. What can I do with what happened? Perhaps the answer is to learn. Perhaps it is to change direction. Perhaps it is to apologize. Perhaps it is to rebuild. Perhaps it is to walk away. Perhaps it is simply to try again with better information. That question moves you from helplessness toward agency. Resilience is not about controlling the outcome. It is about improving your response. You may not control whether someone rejects your application. You can control whether you improve your skills. You may not control whether a relationship ends. You can control how honestly you reflect on what happened. You may not control an unexpected financial setback. You can control whether you learn, adapt, and seek practical solutions. You may not control what people say about you. You can control how much authority you give their opinions. This is where perspective becomes powerful. A setback can feel permanent when you are standing inside it, but emotions often describe the present more dramatically than the future deserves. The worst day of your life is still only one day. The failed attempt is still only one attempt. The rejection is still only one decision made by someone at one point in time. Do not give a temporary event the authority to write a permanent conclusion. There is also wisdom in asking for support. Resilience is not an individual performance where you prove that you need nobody. Strong people sometimes lean on friends, family, mentors, counselors, colleagues, or communities. Seeking support is not weakness. It can be an intelligent way of gathering perspective and conserving strength. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to be disappointed. You are allowed to say, "This hurts." But eventually, when you are ready, ask, "What is still within my control?" That question can become a turning point. Maybe only one thing is within your control today. Then work with that one thing. Make the call, take the walk, send the application, apologize, study, rest, start again. You do not need to rebuild your entire life in one morning. You need to take the next constructive step, and sometimes that step will look incredibly ordinary. That is how resilience often works. Not as a dramatic comeback witnessed by everyone, but as a quiet decision made when nobody is watching. I am not finished. The strongest version of you will not be the person who never experiences failure. It will be the person who learns that failure does not have the final word. Life will push back. Plans will collapse. Doors will close. Some losses will permanently change you, but you can choose what those experiences build inside you. More wisdom, more patience, more courage, more discernment, more compassion, more strength. You do not have to return to the person you were before the setback. You can rise from it as someone wiser than the person who entered it. Conclusion: your strongest self starts here. There is a moment when the map becomes less important than the first step. You can understand your patterns, recognize your fears, question your old beliefs, and know exactly what needs to change. But knowledge alone cannot carry you into a different life. At some point, reflection must become decision, and decision must become action. That moment is now. You have seen how invisible limitations can become familiar, how an old story can quietly shape an identity, and how waiting for confidence can keep you standing still. You have discovered that discipline is not punishment, discomfort is not always danger, and failure is not a permanent definition of who you are. You have also seen that your future requires more than goals. It requires a person capable of carrying those goals with patience, courage, responsibility, and consistency. But becoming your strongest self does not mean becoming flawless. You will still have difficult days, you will lose focus, you will make poor decisions, you will sometimes return to habits you thought you had left behind. That does not mean you have failed, it means you are human. Growth is not a straight line, it is a willingness to return to your values, your commitments, your courage, and the person you are determined to become. Do not wait for your circumstances to become perfect. They rarely will. Do not wait until fear disappears. It may not. Do not wait until everyone understands your choices. They may not. Move forward with what you have. Take the conversation, make the decision. Begin the habit. Set the boundary. Learn the skill. Try again. One meaningful choice may appear insignificant today, but repeated choices become patterns. Patterns become character, and character eventually shapes a life. That is how transformation happens. Quietly, gradually, deliberately. Your strongest self is not hidden somewhere beyond your reach. It is being formed through the decisions you make when nobody is watching. Every time you choose courage over comfort, responsibility over excuses, discipline over impulse, and growth over familiarity, you move closer to that person. So do not ask whether you are already strong enough. Ask whether you are willing to become stronger. Then take the next step. You do not need to cross every boundary today. You only need to stop allowing the next one to convince you that you cannot. Go beyond your limits, not to become someone else, but to finally discover how much more of yourself you are capable of becoming.